Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of Hanging Out with Nolan Hong. And joining us this week on the podcast is a friend of many of our friends here on the podcast. He's connected to both Pua and Arliss, who are former guests on the podcast, but also friends of the podcast. He is a life coach and inspirational speaker. He's an author, educator. He's also the founder of the Find Your Voice as a Leader Institute. And I've just heard nothing but amazing things about him. And just in the couple minutes that we've spoken, I'm already like, I love this man already. So I can't wait to have him on here. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Paul Larsen. We have the best audience. No, we have the best audience.
Nolan, first of all, aloha and mahalo, and I got to tell you, I want that every morning when I get up. I was like, how do you do that? I would have that on my ringtone. I would like wake up and like, wow, I love that. It is absolutely an honor, and I'm humbled to be here. And you've just been, again, we don't know each other that much, but so far you've been just a wonderful, gracious host. So I'm looking forward to this.
No, I'm looking forward to it too, and I have a feeling that after maybe about 2 weeks of waking up to applause, you'd be like, "All right, shut up!" That's how I'd be. I set my ringtone towards what is it? George Michael's Jitterbug.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, at first I was like, "Oh, I feel great," and now it's like, "Shut up." Stop.
Yeah, shut up. Yeah. There is you've touched on it. There is such a thing as like overplay, overexposed, the whole bit. But it's kind of funny to you talking just about that. A lot of things I've been doing now and have been sort of going back to my childhood days about
interesting.
I've had such a blessed life and so forth, and just kind of going back to my childhood days. So I listen to right now, and I'm probably one of the only people that is doing this live on an iPhone or anything, or on your music, whatever you people use for music, whatever hardware they use. But I listen to the Partridge Family, so that takes you back to the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
And the Partridge Family used to be on at 8:30 p.m. on Fridays. And of course, Shirley Jones, David Cassidy, the whole bit. And I found like some of their albums, right? I mean, they weren't necessarily all the singers. It was, and I'm listening to this music and I'm like, and I got on the plane the other day and the flight attendant said, "What are you listening to?" And I said, "Partridge Family." Just like that. Like, "Oh yeah, Partridge Family." Like if somebody would say, "Oh, whoever relevant, And she goes, "No, you're not." And I said, "Here you go." And she was like, "Oh my gosh." And it's funny because I think we look for maybe like comfort things or things around what brings back maybe memories, of that. And that's what I've been into lately. So it's just kind of interesting as we're talking about this. It just kind of strikes me that way. So now we've just lost probably half of your listeners, half of your audience, because they're like, "What is this guy going to teach? What are we going to be talking about? Partridge Family?"
No. Well, I was going to tell you that this is the first time we've had the Partridge Family referenced on this podcast in over 200 episodes. So
see, I told you. Yeah, there we go. Yes, there's a first time for everything.
You know what I want to know is I am surprised that the stewardess asked you what you're listening to. I feel like that's they must see everyone walking on a plane with headphones. Why in particular did she like pick you out and be like, "Hey there, what you listening to?" Like, why was she so interested in that?
Dang, Nolan.
Were you dancing down the aisle? Is that what it was?
This is why you're like a host. You're not supposed to ask that question, right? It's like, that is a brilliant question because nobody really would ask that question. It was just like, oh, and you got it. You nailed it. I got on, how you get on a plane nowadays and, and you kind of line up a little bit in the jetway when people are getting on. And so it's just kind of like, I wasn't full on, I Think I Love You, which is one of their hit songs, dancing.
Oh, I thought you were telling me that.
No.
I was like, we just met, Paul, but I love you too.
I know. So it's a little too early for that, my friend. No, but it was like, I literally was just kind of in this kind of like groove. And it was it was just, I was just kind of like flowing with it. And she saw that, because you're absolutely right. Everyone that was getting on, as people get on, they're kind of in their space, and
Yeah.
they got to get my bag in, and I got to get to my seat, and and you're kind of in this kind of like, and I was just kind of like tripping out as much as you can with the Partridge Family. And she just noticed it, and and she just said, she just said, you just were very animated compared
Hmm.
to everyone else. Not that there's anything wrong with everyone else, but she goes, you just kind of were like, oh, and I want to know what you were listening to, because I wanted some of that too. Although not sure she took me up on that later, like around the music. But yeah, great question. That was a good question.
Well, you mentioned that she didn't believe you at first that you were
Yeah.
listening to the Partridge Family. Was it because she was like, "I love them," or was she like, "Nobody listens to the Partridge Family"?
Both.
You're just messing
So
with me.
it was really interesting, because she knew the Partridge Family. She loved it too, because she was from the same kind of generation of me, growing up in the Partridge Family were on in like the '70s, right? Like I
Hmm.
said, and she didn't believe that somebody probably somebody's getting on a plane in 2022, listening to a contrived musical band, because the Partridge Family, they were all they were all studio singers, except for Shirley Jones and David Cassidy, who actually sang, but the rest of them were all studio singers. Don't ask me how I know all that, but so it's like, it was kind of like, you're listening to that, and I said, yeah. I go, I'm listening to it because later on we talked a little bit, and I go, I'm listening to it because it kind of takes me back to a time, and I just had kind of a fun childhood, an incredible childhood, not without its challenges and not without stuff going on at schools and things for me, but it was just kind of like, it's kind of like a free time,
Mm.
and we all have memories like that, and we all have anchors in our lives that are that way. And I think sometimes we actually just need a reminder of those, or some way to kind of bring us and bring some of that from then into where we are today, right?
Yeah.
And that's what that was doing for me. And so I'm not ashamed of, like, Partridge Family, whatever it was, but that's what that is exactly what was occurring in that kind of scenario.
That's interesting that you bring that up because recently I've been dealing with. So the way I used to look back at my childhood was like, oh, it's such a simple time. Like I didn't have any stress, and I wish I could go back to those times. And then now recently, I'm realizing a lot of the things that didn't go well, my childhood traumas, play a big effect on difficulties that I have now as an adult. And so it's curious. I'm curious to hear your take on this as to what it is about your childhood, whether it's good or bad, that still has like in your opinion that has such an effect on us now as adults, where we have these maybe what is the word I'm looking for? Like unfair expectations, I guess, of ourselves now based on something that
Sure.
happened 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and good insight, because it could be unfair expectations, it could be unrealized potential, it could be a lot of uns, what you just
Mm,
said there,
yeah.
unloved, unrecognized, unvalidated. It could be a lot of that, which comes out of the childhood. It could also be the opposite, as is it, no, it was a time of play. It was a time of, like, of real kind of simple pleasures. It was a time of playing outside until 11 o'clock at night, until your mother and father or whoever called you in to get in, and so forth. But we were out playing all the time on the streets, in all this kind of, before all the play dates were always, now are the
Yeah.
thing, right? So I do think we all have, we have what we call, we probably all heard this, the inner child. you
Hmm.
know we grow up, the physicalness of us grow up, emotionally we mature, or we attempt to, right? We evolve, we go through life, but I do think there's a part of us from that childhood that is our inner child, and which a lot of therapy works on, right? Therapeutic
Mm-hmm.
interventions work on the inner child to really say, what could you do around that maybe that can be creative, that can be colorful, that still needs to grow, that still needs to be validated, that still needs to be recognized, and man, maybe still needs to be loved, right?
Right.
And without getting like, I don't know if the Partridge Family is going to provide me a lot of love for my inner child, but it does provide me, in that instance, a lot of like frivolity in my adult mind of just like, this is like, I'm having a good time right now. I'm in a good space.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really important, Nolan, for me is not even so much the past, because the past is the past. It is what it is. I can't change the way I was at 5, what happened to me at 7, what I did at 8, and how I experienced something at age 10. I can't excuse me, I can't change any of that. But what I can do is how I am right now and where I might be tomorrow, right? Current to future. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I do. That's what I do as a coach. But it starts with me. It starts with really looking to say, yeah, this is like, I can have a good life or a bad life. We are given a life, but it's what we make of it. And I see so many people, including myself, I'm sure at times, we hold on to that past, and it just like it like drags us back, and we
Mm-hmm.
can be anchored in that. And I don't want to at all judge what has happened to people in the past, right? As you mentioned, trauma and things like that. But really, what we have right now is right now. And so much has been written about the present, right? Eckhart Tolle, right? The power of now, right?
Yeah.
And how do we harness that and so forth. And I've spent probably like a good portion of my adult life, especially the last 5 to 6 to 7 to 40 years, working on how can I be present right now? How can I really enjoy right now? How can I really be appreciative right now? So if I bring a little Partridge Family in, throw in a little Brady Bunch, and anything else that might come in, um, that's beautiful. But I also recognize I'm responsible for what I think right now, and what will happen then in the future. But all I have is boom, right now.
In hearing you talk and knowing what you do for a living, it seems like from the outside looking in, people would hear you and be like, "Man, this guy's got it all together, and he's so confident and so well learned, and that's why you are in the position of teaching and coaching." But I have to think that you aren't always like this. I mean, there's probably a point where that this became you realize this became your life passion or your direction in life. So where did this all come from? Where does this passion for helping others, looking within yourself and trying to continue to grow and understand and appreciate, where you are today in the present and all that. Where did this start?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't know where
Have,
it started.
have
I
you always
know
been like this? Like even growing up as a child, like just I
I
sense that you're very positive, full of energy and life. But I mean, was that
yeah,
always the
yeah.
case?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good, it is a good question because it makes me think about my life, right?
Hmm.
I've had trials and tribulations in my life. I was, like everyone, we've all got things to deal with. Um, but the one thing I've always had was faith. And I use that term in terms of hope, not necessarily in a religious context, right? Which is
Right.
wonderful for people. But it's kind of like faith, like, okay, well, yeah, like I remember one day, I was bullied in school, and I come home with like these welts on my shoulders or something, and because
Hmm.
kids were smart back then, they bullied you where people couldn't see necessarily, not like thankfully not the face, but even though that is very traumatic and painful and hurtful and all these things, it was like not going to be forever, and it wasn't going to be like the rest of my life. Even though that day, that hour, it feels like it is going on forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I bring that up only because it's like, yeah, we have to deal with these things, right, in life. But I've always had this kind of like, you know what? I'm going to figure some stuff out. I'm not going to be in this place all my life. I've got to figure this out. What do I need to do to get out of this situation or make it better? Right. Um, and I got to figure, and so I've always kind of had that faith. As I got stronger, both mentally, physically, emotionally, all of that, the heart and the
Mm-hmm.
mind, I was able to then, like, the faith grew stronger. And I would go into situations sometimes and it would be, Nolan, like, well, I don't really know what I'm doing right now, and it's like, but I'm going to figure it out. And I'm going to kind of trust that. So therein lies what you said around kind of like that sort of positive piece. I don't believe everything is all positive and all Pollyanna, to borrow my own name, right? I look at things very realistically, but I look at things like, well, you know what? I've gotten by this far. I've had bad days and I've gotten through them. I've had many more good days and bad days, and I've celebrated those. I think I can figure some stuff out. And that's what I do. So there is an inherent sort of not just glass half full, but the glass is half, and then what I fill it with, excuse me, is up to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I look at in terms of like, yeah, I can, having that faith in myself first around that.
And do you think you were just born with that kind of personality, or can you attribute it maybe to the inspiration of your parents or people around you? Where did that faith come from, do you think?
Yeah, I think it came. That's a great. Yeah, man, you're knocking it out of the park with these questions, Nolan, because it is. It's a
I'm
really
just
good
very
question.
nosy. That's all it is.
Yeah. Okay. Nosy Nolan. Nosy Nolan.
Yeah.
Um, Seriously, no. My parents. So I was born in 1961. Right. I was
Okay.
born in 1961, and I was born in December of that year. January of 1961, 11 months before I was born, my parents lost my brother. He died.
Oh, wow.
And
How old was he?
he was 2.5.
Wow.
And so they went through probably the most unimaginable trauma,
Mm.
tragedy, loss, sadness that people can go through. And that's losing a child, and
Yeah.
losing a child so young.
Right.
And this was 1961. No counseling, no therapy.
Mm.
Literally, they came home from the hospital and they were like just shattered. Family,
Mm-hmm.
definitely family, closes in and friends come in and all that wonderful support system. But they went back to work. It was like, okay, we have to go back and we have to, and then I came in December. And the reason I bring that story up is they raised me not in the shadow of my beautiful brother, David, right? They raised me to be who I was. And they could have easily raised me to be in the shadow of my other brother, right? Of
Mm.
my of
Right.
my of my little brother, my little big brother. And instead, they no, you're your own person. We want you to understand who David is and was, but you're your own person, Paul. And so they had this faith,
Mm.
and they said that they knew that when I was there, when I came out, they go, yeah, he's walking around like he owns the house, and all of these things. He'll be, he's gonna, like, he'll be fine in that way. But I think they reinforced that. They reinforced that strength.
Mm-hmm.
And having gone through what they went through, and going back to what you and I talked about in terms of childhood and trauma, and whether that is in childhood or adult, they survived that. And they thrived with a new child. And of course, I had an older brother and sister. So we had a beautiful family unit. They were still thriving with that. And it wasn't not acknowledging the loss of that, my beautiful brother, but it was honoring it. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
never, to this day, Nolan, my parents have transitioned. They've gone to the They've transitioned now, and I just think I was, it was so beautiful to be raised by these two people who, again, all had their own strengths and opportunities and weaknesses and everything, but they did the best that they could, which I think almost everyone tries to do, and they just realized they kind of got out of the way and let us grow, and that I think is the most important thing. They had the science down, and then they allowed the art to come in. So they had the art and science of life, and they just, kind of like the painting behind me, allowed it to bring the color and vibrancy into my life. But knowing that, I would have my knocks as well, and to learn from those.
It's so fascinating to hear how your parents, how you describe them as seeing this strength in you and encouraging it, and seeing that you walked around as if you own the place, and instead of trying to knock you down a peg, they're like, no, let's foster this. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm Asian, and many of us Asians come from the similar backgrounds
Mm-hmm.
of our families and parents who
Sure.
are always about like humbling us and like not
Right.
encouraging us, but always like, you could do better, So it's fascinating for me to see someone like yourself, come from a kind of an opposite type of environment. And I'm wondering, do you feel like that's what has lent to how you are today, which seems like you're very confident, and able to find the joy in life. Not that I don't find joy in life, but you know what I mean.
You seem like a very joyful person, my friend.
Yeah.
So I've seen you before. I've watched you before. You seem like a very joyful person. You exude that. But I love the fact. So absolutely, I think absolutely right. We look for certain. We'll look for, the joyful anchors that we can have in life, because we could look for
Hmm.
the opposite. There is a study that I sometimes quote in some of my engagements, or speaking engagements. The National Science Foundation did a study back in 2005, which is now, doesn't seem like that long ago, but it was, quite a while ago now. But they found that the average adult, male or female, can process anywhere from 12,000 to 60,000 distinctive thoughts a day in our mind. Now, I don't really know the difference between 12,000 and 60,000, right? I'll take 500 thoughts a day, but 12,000 to 60,000 those are significant numbers to think about what's going on up here all the time, and
Right.
multiple thoughts and all that. They also found that 80% of the thoughts are from the day before. So we are carrying legacy thoughts, just like an old
Mm.
legacy software program or all legacy hardware that we've got. We're carrying the thoughts from the day before. So we're just kind of like, we just are, and we're not necessarily creating new thoughts and new ways of thinking or new ways of looking at something. It's just regurgitating the same thoughts, and it's certainly what other people might bring to us as well. Also, 90% of the thoughts have a negativity bias, a what
90%.
if.
Wow.
90% can have up to a 90% negativity bias. A what if. I've got to watch
Hmm.
out for that. I've got to, I got to want to do this. That we anchor in that. That could be true negativity, where we see, we've probably all met people like that, that are
Hmm.
just always negative, and there's a victimology to it, and there's like all this. Or it could just be looking at things like, oh, I better do this if I don't, the
Right.
negativity could be masked a certain way.
Hmm.
So it was amazing to me when I read that. And even if some of that study, even if I looked at some of that study and it was like, not even completely 60,000, right? Those are
Right. Right.
still incredible numbers and percentages. And
Hmm.
that the one thing I've learned for myself through trial and error, and through sort of like, just again, serving others as a coach, but first serving myself, right?
Hmm.
And helping to dilute my ego. So my ego can, it's kind of like sometimes I, want to put my ego on hold. But the one thing I've learned is I can control this up here. Nobody lives up here except me. I control everything up here. This is the one area that I can absolutely influence and can control. And so many times in life, on a minute by minute, hour by hour, or day by day sequence, we just react. And we don't even think about what's going on up here. We just are reacting, which is what
Mm-hmm.
that study tells us. We're just reacting. So what I've learned is instead of reacting to something, I respond. Responding takes maybe a 5-second pause, maybe a 5-minute pause, maybe a 5-hour pause, maybe a 5-day pause, whatever it might be, but a pause, a deliberate pause to say, wait a minute, I'm going to respond a little bit differently than I have, or I want to respond differently than what my reaction is telling me. The reaction's ego-based, but I'm going to respond differently. And I've learned that from just from deliberate practice in which to do. I'm human as much as, we're all human. I have angry days, mad days, discouraged days, disappointed days. I have motivated days, happy days, all those things, but I have days where I just, ooh, Paul, or ooh, Nolan, how could you do that? But for the most part, I work on that response versus the reaction, because the world is just reactionary. And if anything, the last few years have taught us that globally, with the pandemic, with all the strife in the world, and the wars in the world, and the divisiveness that we have in society, which we've always had, but seems to be even elevated with the use of technology and all the different ways we have to connect, right?
Right.
Um, Boy, we could just react, and that's what's happening. All you got to do is go on any of your platform of choice, and you can see reactions all over the place. But how about a response? How about just taking that time to respond? But first, it requires us to respond to ourselves before we
What would
respond to others.
what is it? So I think philosophically I understand the difference between react and respond, but what would be a good example of the difference between the two for someone who hears this and is like, I get the philosophy behind this, but I don't quite understand, what I've done that I could change. Where an example of me reacting and what
Right,
an example of a response instead would be.
right, yeah. I don't know. I haven't done that yet. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That was a reaction. That was a
Yeah.
response too. Okay. So that's actually okay. So the way I use it it's very relevant for me, because one of the things I work on with myself and I work on with clients is called imposter syndrome.
Hmm.
And imposter syndrome is where we feel like we're a fake or fraud sometimes in
Yes.
life, and we feel that we have to be somebody else to be successful, and that if we don't change who we are, we're going to be found out as a fake or fraud, right? So with imposter syndrome, it's not about having more confidence. People say, "Oh, just have more confidence."
Right.
I can
Right.
be a very confident imposter, right?
Yes.
You said to me, "Oh, you seem kind of confident. You seem like you get da. Yeah, but I have days where it's like I feel like, what am I doing here? I don't know what I'm
Mm.
doing. I'm Look at all these people who know so much more than me. I'm actually kind of a fake. I'm kind of a fraud, and I'm going to be found out. That's a reaction right there.
Hmm.
That's a reaction that is triggered, or a catalyst, by the environment I might be in, or a situation I'm in, or talking to someone, or being in a group with people, or getting a promotion to a new job, or going to a new school, where the last school I was like all A's. This school, everyone's so much smarter than me. Oh my gosh, what am I
Hmm.
doing here? Da, 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 da. All those things. Any of those could be triggers for creating this feeling, that we are not good enough, we are not
Hmm.
capable enough. That's a reaction, right? So we swirl. I like to say we swirl in it. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm a fake, I'm a fraud. So what am I going to do? Okay, what do I got to do? Okay. If I feel like a fake or fraud with Nolan, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to try to like please Nolan. I'm going to try to, be a people pleaser, so he'll like me, and he won't really notice that I have no clue what I'm doing or saying, right? So we do the people pleaser is one thing. Or we try to become perfectionists at what we do. So if I am so perfect at everything I do, I won't be noticed as a fake or fraud. Those are all reactions. A response requires kind of like an intervention, and interventions take on different meanings. There's the show intervention on TV, but intervention is an intervention in our algorithm up here, the thought pattern. So here's what I do. When I get a trigger, like imposter syndrome, which I do, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm beginning to feel like a faker. Okay, well, hold on. That's a reaction. So I have like a 5-second kind of like, okay, Paul, wait a minute. That's your imposter voice talking. You've got the imposter voice is triggered by something, which means, Paul, you're doing something kind of out of your comfort zone right now. You're talking to this great guy on this great show. You're learning a lot about him. You're learning a lot about maybe yourself as well. Wow, that's really kind of cool. Your imposter voice is saying, "Oh, you don't belong on that show. You're like a fake or fraud." But wow, you're really doing good. You're stepping out of your comfort zone. You're growing. You're getting recognized for this. That's really good. Look at all this goodness, right? That you're bringing forward, Paul. Think of that. Think of it that way. It requires a slight finesse of the thought. That's a response. That's a deliberate response versus the reaction, which is like, okay, I'm a fake, I'm a fraud, oh my God. And it just is continuous. Like that study said, right? We just continually do the same thing over and over again or think the same thing. The response is break that and then respond deliberately with perhaps a new thought or what we call a reframe, and so I practice that with myself. I mean, everything I do as a coach, I do with myself because otherwise I don't know how it works or not, right?
Right.
But I practice it with myself, and then I work, and then you get into like anything else, you build up that muscle or you build up that that capacity to then really, really sort of like make it a practice. And that's what I do with my clients is when they have these feelings of like a fake or fraud, you respond differently than the reaction. So hopefully that was that clear on that piece.
That's ultra clear. And what I love about that is it kind of goes back to what you had talked about earlier about being present. And it seems like response keeps you in the present of this is what's happening now. This is what you're getting. This is what you're doing. This is what you're learning. And whereas reaction, it takes you to past traumas of like, well, this happened before and this is what it relates to, or what will happen in the future. Like if I keep this up, I'm going to get found out as a fraud. Like it's a lot of not present thought. So to me, what I'm hearing from you is that response is, hey, stay here and experience this and recognize what's happening versus the reaction is like, oh my gosh, past, future, what's going on? And for me, I have anxiety, and that's something that I've been, working on. And that's one of the things that used to happen a lot is anytime those thoughts came up, it just bore more thoughts of fear and, well, this happened before and what will happen in the future. And that made me more anxious. Whereas what you're saying with response, it's like, no, just like, let's take this experience or this feeling and listen to it and actually understand what's going on. And I think that's really powerful. So I appreciate you explaining that to me. That does make it very clear.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I can explain it that way because that's what I do. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It could be steeped in academia somewhere. It could be a model somewhere. It could be theory somewhere, but it's actually what I do. So I could explain it to say that's what I do. And you're absolutely spot on when you say, it brings us to the present because when we're feeling like a fake or fraud, that's really what we felt.
Yes.
And I'm not that person yesterday. I'm not that person last week. And I'm certainly not that person years ago. And I can be if I want to be that person, but I'm choosing something different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly it. I really like your tag there about it brings you to the present, right? And you're bold enough to be in the present, because many times with those
Yeah.
feelings, we shrink.
Yep.
You know, it happens right now. There's all the rage about something called quiet quitting, right? And
Hmm.
and quiet quitting is when people go into companies and they become deliberately disengaged. I'm just going to do the bare minimum. Da, 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 da. Well, quiet quitting's been around forever.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that, at least somebody on TikTok brought it out. I'm
Yeah.
quiet quitting, and so people can talk about it more, because disengagement's
Yeah.
been around. But people quiet quit their lives all the time, regardless
Mm.
of a company, because they let those feelings just begin to really shroud and push them down
Yeah.
and shrink wrap them, right? And
Hmm.
then before they know it, they're half who they used to be. And I believe it's the opposite is what you were talking about, which is we should expand everything. We should expand who we are, and expand our capabilities, and expand our strengths, and expand our potential. And with that comes risk of, like, you know, I might make a mistake. I might say something I didn't want. But of course, but to have, though, that ability to say, but I can respond differently than I would if I reacted that way. That's the
Mm.
key. I
Yeah.
always have the choice of response.
You know what I love about you, what I'm learning so far is that I can see why you're such an effective and successful coach or leader, because I think you tend to open yourself up and be relatable to someone. I think it's hard when someone just looks up at someone in a leadership position and it seems unattainable, or they go, "Oh, this person has got it all figured out. I've never known all this stuff. Like I can't obtain that." Whereas you're saying like, no, I'm just like you. So I hope you are okay with me asking this question, because you'd mentioned that you had grown up with trials and tribulations and things, traumas. And so I'm curious, what is there a trial or tribulation that you think really sparked and as an anchor to inspiring you to this path of life that you've taken, where it's like, oh, it was tough to deal with, but I'm glad I went through that, because now, because of that experience, I can do what I'm doing now. Is there something like that that you can think of?
Yeah, absolutely. It was what we would call. I grew up in California, so in California we would call it like junior high or middle school, right? And it was
Mm-hmm.
where I went to school. It was grade 7 and grades 8.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like really right in the middle. One through, K through 6 was cool. Kindergarten was like, I was like, I was just blast in kindergarten, and all throughout like grades 1 through 6. And then I got to grade 7, and it was a new school, and so forth. And immediately picked on,
Mm-hmm.
immediately pointed at, immediately made fun of, and then immediately the physical pieces came after that. Um, and at first, I didn't know what to do. I was like, this was like a whole new, terrible world for me, because I came from this world of, as I mentioned earlier, Partridge Family. It's just like, what's going on? Like, we're having fun. We're like, da da da. And I had fun in school. I love my teachers. I love my friends. I had a great time. Da da da. And then I get to this like new school, and with all these other kids from all over, because schools, you expand, right, as you
Mm-hmm.
go into junior high and high school. And all of a sudden it was like, you are like picked out as like the weakling. You are picked out as vulnerable. You are picked out as like, my smarts, which I can kind of, I like school. So I was, but all of a sudden that became kind of a liability. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then like I mentioned earlier, I would start to get hit, and I would start to get sort of like, and I didn't know, I didn't have the DNA to necessarily fight back. That was not my reaction in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I started shrinking more. And I thought, well, if how I am is calling attention to these kids
Mm-hmm.
to make fun of me more and to hit me more. And it was really the physicalness that was harder than
Yeah.
the other taunts. Then maybe if I'm really quiet and I kind of shrink, I won't be noticed as much. And so how did that manifested into? Started missing school much more. Didn't want to go to school. I remember I used to be like straight A's or really good. I liked school, so it was really good. All of a sudden, my mom would get notices about he's had this many absences. Blah 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 blah. We're really concerned about his commitment to school. It was like what? Like
Mm.
Paul was never like that. And there was a part in that evolution between seventh and eighth grade for me where it was like, it goes back to, okay, I've got to figure this out. Now, my parents were helpful in terms of what can we do, and it wasn't like I was friendless. I had friends, in a sense, but it still was like, wow, what can I do here? And I really had a very pivotal moment in my little self, because you really are, you're like this, kid. And I just was like, okay, I've got to figure this out somehow. And I've got to figure that this too shall pass, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
even though it goes back to what we said earlier, even though I was in this state, um, I recognized what was going on. I also recognized that I wasn't going to become somebody I wasn't, because that is something that goes back to what we just said. All of a sudden, you become the kid or the person to please others, or
Right.
and I was like, no. I recognize that that was not what I was going to do, but I needed to figure stuff out. This was back in the 1970s. Bullying, nowadays has taken on a whole different meaning in schools, and there's lots of support systems and lots of education
Yeah.
around it. Um, but I recognized in the moment that it was like, I've got to get through this, hour by hour, day by day. And I figured I'm going to look at all the ways in which I can do that. Right. And it was just kind of like looking at one day at a time without even knowing what that necessarily meant. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
that to me was a survival instinct. It wasn't like I didn't run away from it. Not that there's anything wrong if people need to do that to get out of a situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what happened was I noticed, as I kind of stopped calling attention to it by adding a lot of drama to it myself, it started to kind of dissipate. The attention of those people, the quote unquote, the bull, started to like, oh, okay, he's not fun anymore around that, right?
Uh,
He's not reacting the same way, because I wasn't reacting the same way, perhaps. Let's go on to somebody else. The attention span is like a nanosecond with people, that are looking for that
mm,
attention, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking
right.
for control and attention and all that. And so the more I saw a little progress that way, and again, I didn't have any kind of, I was just trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
The more I noticed, like, oh, this is interesting. I can sort of influence that based on what I'm thinking. And that was very pivotal for me. It wasn't, I'm not like some, whatever that show is on, or the show on TV, the Big Bang Theory and the Young and Sheldon and all these smart,
Yeah.
people. I was just trying to survive in that sense. At the same time, I wanted to stay in school because I like school. I still like, it wasn't like it was like I like school. And so there was a conflict of interest there, because the institution that I enjoyed was actually beating me up in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, right?
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so I kind of figured it out. One reaction could have been learn to fight, Paul. Really like turn around and learn to fight and stand up for who you are, and get into that physicalness of it, which I'm not saying that's good or bad if people feel that that's what they need to do. Again, that was not what I was going to do, though.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to fight a different way. And that's where I think I really learned, to your point, thinking about it now and retelling you this, because we had, I didn't know we were going to go down this path with your questions. So this is really helpful for me to kind of like have this insight too. but I figured I really had to figure out certain things. And somehow, Nolan, I knew that what I was doing here in 7th and 8th grade was going to help me later on. Is somehow with something, I didn't know what. So what happened was after 8th grade. So I got through 8th grade. I remember when 8th grade was over and they have like a little graduation, and I was like, oh my God, thank God. And I think I used other words than just that, but it was like, I'm done with 8th grade. And then we all went to high school. Right. And so high school was huge, right? High school, And so that was beginning of 9th grade. And I had a little hesitation. Well, guess what happens in high school? Everybody kind of, you go from however many people, you go for like, we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds in our high school, and everyone has to kind of then find their own way. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that dissipated for me. And I found like different groups of people. I found different passions. I found different, and all of a sudden everything just kind of began to kind of build synchronicity. High school was absolutely fantastic. I just had the best time ever. And if I say this with a little kind of like apprehension, but if I had to go through some of that in 7th and 8th, in order to figure out what I needed to do from 9 to 12 and then the rest of my life, I did that.
Mm-hmm.
I did that. And so later on, to your point around the child, I needed to go back to that 7th and 8th grade child, because that's what we are. You think we're not, but we are. And just say, you did good. You did the best you could. You survived. And you actually built yourself to thrive later on.
Yeah.
And it's those experiences as a coach that I look at, not so much always going back to junior high or middle school, but just in our adult life that we can bring in. And I bring that into how I coach and who I coach. But it starts with me. It's sort of like my life, and how I have worked with myself and so forth around that. That's how I work and what I help others with, and how I serve others, so to speak.
Wow. Do you know why those bullies targeted you during that time? Like, was it just you just randomly selected and then that's why they just kept going?
I was good looking. I was like, had great clothes. I was like the smartest kid. No, none of that. Right. Because
Right, right.
we don't know why. Bullies are, bullies, period. Whether you're children or adults, right? Looking for control. They're looking for perhaps their own way of like exerting control.
Mm-hmm.
They're manifesting things they're not getting. They can sometimes be projecting what is happening at home for them, right? So, but I had no idea around that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Many times I was probably what they would call an easy target. And I don't mean that from like, oh, wearing a sandwich board that says, come hit me. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like, perhaps I was just like the kid in class that would raise the hand a few times, answer the questions. Oops, calling attention, right?
Uh,
I know in one of the classrooms where I used to get I used to get hit as a kid walked down the aisle, is where I was sitting. And the reason I knew that is because I switched desks, and the person that sat there next got hit.
my
So it
gosh.
wasn't necessarily me, right?
Huh.
And sometimes it was me, So there could be a variety of reasons why kids are picked on for being different, perception or perceived, or
Mm-hmm.
for being smart, which could be different, or for standing out, or for not standing out, or whatever it might be. So it could be any of those variety things that came out. I mean, and I didn't, it's an interesting question, because I didn't spend much time. This is where my mother really played a role with me. She says, I, you know, I mean, you're grasping at stuff as a kid, right? Like,
Yeah.
do I change my clothes? Do I wear
Mm-hmm.
different things so that, do I try to excuse me, do I try to fit in, whatever that might be. And my mom was really good. Every morning we would sit at the breakfast table and we'd have our little breakfast together. My dad was an airline pilot, so he was gone sometimes quite a bit. My mom was always there, and she just would say kind of like a breakfast blessing with me. Again, we weren't religious in the sense. It was just sort of like kind of helping to center the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked about this on in terms of these breakfast blessings. I want to write a book on it, and like breakfast blessings, because they kind of help center me. It didn't like change the whole day,
Mm-hmm.
but it just brought into like, again, Paul, you are loved, you are recognized, you are validated. Maybe not in that moment when somebody might, when you're interacting at school, but you have to remember that you are, because we're in life for the long term, not that short term. So to your question, did it matter why I was picked on? If there was a reason, what could I have done about it? Right. In that
Right,
sense.
right. So was coaching something that you went into, out of high school, or how did you
Out of
get
high school.
to this path here? Like,
No,
where
out of
did your
high
life
school.
take you?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, no, I love that. It's a great question. No, I got into coaching. I had I went to college, and in my undergrad days, I used to admire my friends and fellow students who were like, oh my gosh, they're in pre-med, or they're going
yeah.
to be they're getting their Pharm D, right? Or wow, they're engineers, or they're getting they're going for business and they're going to go for an MBA, blah, 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 whatever. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm going to
Yeah.
history. Oh no, today I'm going to do this. I was like, and I'm so glad I did that, because I didn't know. Like I was
Yeah.
so kind of that whole experiment thing. Like I was experimenting. And then when I got into the corporate world, it was wonderful. I thought, I kind of like working with people. So I kind of like, got in and dabbled here and there in different roles, and then became a manager, and that was kind of fun, and and working with people, and people would kind of seek me out for kind of guidance or advice, right? Kind of thoughts, be a thought partner with me, Paul.
Mm.
It's like, oh, cool, yeah, that's kind of cool. I like that, Um, and so I got into HR later on in my career in the corporate world, and human resources has a wide swath. But the parts I loved was the development piece, personal development, professional development, learning and development, right? Growing, and really like understanding how people can learn and grow, especially in an organizational environment that sometimes doesn't always promote that. They think they do, but they actually don't. So that's what I was doing. And then, I was like, I had some great roles. And my last role was at Adobe Technology. And I was like, gosh, I'm not really feeling it. Adobe's a great company, beautiful company, absolutely spectacular company. But I was quiet quitting in a way. I was like
Mm.
kind of disengaged. Had nothing to do with the company or the people or the clients or the products. It was all about me, where I was in my life. My father then passed away, and this was like 2008, 2009, and he had a wonderful life. He was a blessed man, great life. And I through his passing, his transition, I heard people talk about what a wonderful man he was. He was an
Mm.
incredible man, incredible father, incredible grandfather, incredible great grandfather, and incredible uncle, incredible neighbor. People were coming like talking about him, like, oh, he was wonderful back in 1962. It's like, what? Like, wow, this man had such a difference. The flight crews that he flew with were like talked about Captain Alfie. His name was Alf. And they're like, he was wonderful to fly with. He was like so considerate, such a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful person to fly with, besides being a top-notch aviator. And I'm sitting there like, wow. And I knew all this because he was
Mm-hmm.
a good man. But Nolan, I'm sitting there like, split second, I'm thinking, what are they going to say about me?
Mm.
It's that proverbial like when you pass away, there's those exercises people have you like write your obituary, right? Well, I was doing that, at my father's memorial service. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I know this about my dad, and it's incredible to hear all this. But what are they going to say about me? It's like, Paul's a great HR leader. Paul helps me with my comp plans. Paul helps me interview lots of people. And I knew I did more than that, right? But I was going through like, oh my gosh. And what that was a reaction. And the response that I needed to have and that I did have was, there's more here for me to do. I have something else to give. I have another way to serve. It wasn't, the reaction was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. I want more. I want to be known for more. I want to do more things. The response was, okay, then how do I do that? And that was very pivotal for me, because it was like, I've got to get out from under the corporate confines. Nothing to do with the company. Adobe was a brilliant company. It was where I was in my life. And so that's what I did. And so I went out on my own, and I didn't have it all figured out, but I had enough kind of lined up, and I recognized that, do I want to consult a little bit? And it became very apparent afterwards that coaching, working with people one-on-one or in small groups, helping them realize their potential, helping them to solve a pain point, helping them to create momentum in their life, helping them to get unstuck, because I had been stuck in so many areas of my life before, and helping them to kind of get unstuck. So with my own kind of like way of kind of navigating the world, and then getting some great coaching, training and development myself, I went into it, and that was it. And it was a calling. That was what I was meant to do. And I've been doing it since. So I kind of went out on my own in like I said, 2009, and kind of went into coaching, soon thereafter. And it was like, been doing that now. And it's what I meant to do. It's what I'm meant to do. And I don't ever see it ending, right?
Yeah.
It's my life. It's how my life has come into integrated mode, a blended mode. There's not work life. It's all life. So it's a matter of how we blend it all together.
That's so interesting, because in talking to you before hearing that story, I would have assumed you'd been doing this for decades. It just seems like it just comes out of you naturally. And I know you've been doing it for a while, but still that's relatively short compared to what I had assumed, because I joked like, did you just do this out of high school? But there's a little truth to it in that I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if you said yes, because you are. It just seems like this is you. Like it just comes out in the tone of voice and what you say and your understanding of yourself and your experiences. It just seems like, oh yeah, of course, Paul's a coach and
Well, you
and a
know
leader.
what? I love what you say. I love the way you say that, and I thank you for that. And maybe I was, maybe I have been. I just hadn't given it a name,
Right,
right?
right.
Because I go back, just by you asking me that question right now, I go back to that story I told you about 7th and 8th grade and so forth. I was self-coaching myself there. I didn't know what it was. It was like coaching was always in sports, right? As it is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that's what I was doing. So I started with myself on that. My mom was a coach for me, right? She was like helping me through all, I had friends, that were probably coaching. So you're absolutely right. There wasn't necessarily a formalized name around it. And so, and I maybe was not available to it as yet, until I went through some more life experiences. I believe things happen in life when we're ready. There's that quote around, when we're ready to learn, the teacher shows up, and all that,
Yeah,
whether the teacher is an actual person or an event
yeah.
or a situation. And so even I told you, when I left Adobe, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be a coach. I'm going to hang out my
Yeah.
shingle, here's my business cards, blah, 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 blah. No, I still went through kind of like some experiences of like, gosh, what do I want to do? What is it that I want to sort of like understand about me and so forth. And I still do. I still do. And that's the beauty of, I think, what life can offer us is if we choose to see life and choose to really like engage with it and get messy with it and
Mm-hmm.
grow with it. A lot of people stay in the fixed mindset, right? Which is fear based, which is, it's holding on. It's resisting. And
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like, I'm not going to listen to feedback. I'm not going to look for, I don't want to listen to anybody. I'm not going to ask questions. Everything's fear. It's scarcity. There's not
Mm-hmm.
enough versus just releasing that breath, expanding, and then looking for ways in which we can grow. And growing is stepping out of the old CZ, that comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be messy, and not everything is all going to be lined up, but it's putting on that the curiosity hat and just like, wow, this is, I get to do this versus you should do this, Paul. You need to do this, Paul. You have to do this, Paul. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, I get to do this. I choose to do this. And that's how I approach everything now. It's inspired. It's living an inspired life versus a forced life. And that's what I help with myself. And that's what I help with my clients.
I'm sure you have a wide variety of clients, but is there a type of particular client or something that many of your clients come to you specifically for help with that is kind of more common, I guess?
Great question. That's a really good question. So I love all of my clients.
Right.
I'm just, it's not about like, oh, I choose you as a client or they choose me and thus I love you. It's not about like that. Like, oh yeah, there really is. I have like, I believe like I attract a certain individual,
Yeah.
but they're from all over. And
Mm-hmm.
normally it's somebody, individual who maybe find themselves stuck at a point in their life. And that could be anywhere in the great in the timeline or the legacy that is our life, our life map. And they know, they know, they know that they want more. And it might be just a little inclination, just a little bit, or it could be full blown. But there's an awareness there and what we call coachability. I've got to release this. I know there's more. I want something else. It may not be a new job. It may not be like a whole new life. Um, but there's something to get them unstuck from where they're at. Because coaching's about current to future, as
Mm-hmm.
I said earlier. So it really is like becoming very, very present. So I look for the people that tend to kind of like gravitate towards me are people who have a strong algorithm up here. This just plays over and over again. It's ongoing, just like those thoughts that we talked about. And it's just
Right.
going, 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 going. And we need to get in there and take a pause, as I said. So the reactions become a little muted. We create some responses, and then you begin to then create awareness of what you need to do. I work with in my life. I work with three A's. The three A's. One is awareness. You bring awareness into where you're at right now. You bring awareness into how you're feeling right now. You bring awareness into how you're thinking right now. You bring awareness into who you are right now. From awareness, we go to advocacy. And that's what I've been talking about. Like, how are we advocates for ourselves? And that can go back to childhood, as you mentioned earlier, in terms of that. But right now, irregardless of what happened to our child back in that time, how do we advocate for ourselves right now? How do we look for that internal validation? We spend we spend so much time talking about external validation and looking for that. How do we internally validate ourselves? What is that advocacy? How are we advocates for ourselves? What does that look like? What does it feel like? What do we need to do around that? And that last part that I just said is key to the third A, which is action. We can have all the awareness we want. We can have all the advocacy we want, Nolan, but we need to take action in life. We need to take little baby sustainable steps. They don't have to be they don't have to be like giant steps. We can just take little baby steps towards what we're looking for, towards an outcome, towards a vision, towards a deliberate purpose, whatever that might be. So what I bring into myself around this is that clarity in terms of what those steps are, right? Or step. And that's what I work with my clients on. So if you think about that avatar, that could be a lot of people fall into that avatar, which is for me so brilliant. I mean, it's so brilliant because I get to meet people from all over, and they're doing like all this incredible stuff, and or they're raising incredible families, or they're in school, or they're in their full-fledged career, or they're going for all this, or they're going for their next chapter in life, right? After some of all that. I run the gamut. The key, though, is that coachability, that coachability DNA to say, I want something more. I'm not sure what. I'm not sure how, but I want something more, and I'm open to discussing that.
Mm-hmm.
That's that opens me up then as the coach in terms of that synchronicity.
I love
And
that
working with people.
I love your third A being action, because I think there's so many of us that can easily do the first two A's. We acknowledge and we advocate. So we study so much about, like, oh, this is what's going on with me, and this is what I should be doing. And then we just get stuck in that of, like, kind of the reaction where we're just like, this is what I should be doing. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing it. And then you start to, like, self pity and things. But
Mm-hmm.
for you to bring in that action, it's like, no, now that we've done that, here's what you do. It gets you out of that rut of just being lost in this swirl of, now I've recognized all the problems and now I know what I should be doing. But I found myself in the past before just getting stuck there and just being like, I have all these problems now that I know what they are, and now I know what I
Right.
should be doing. I'm not doing it, so I'm a terrible person. All these
Right.
things.
No, you're right. What you're brilliantly describing and demonstrating are the voices we have up here. We can call them the inner
Mm-hmm.
critic. We can call them the gremlins. We can call them the saboteurs. Each of them have their own kind of body of work that people have worked on that will say, you can have awareness, Nolan. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
I'll give you a little advocacy, Nolan. Okay. But action, you're staying
no,
back
yeah,
here.
yeah.
You're
Stay
staying
where
back
you're
in the
safe.
you're staying in the fixed mindset where there's no
Yeah.
action. You're not going to take any action to get out of this. No, 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 no.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a little awareness, but no action. You're
Yeah,
absolutely right. You're absolutely right, because action requires us to physically, take some action. And
yeah.
physicalness can even be just a new thought, a new
Mm-hmm.
worldview to try on something else. But it requires something. And so all of our voices that have been developed through the years just go on alert. It's like fire alert, red alert, the whole thing. And the bells ring and the sirens and the whole bit. And it's like, oh no, grab him back
Yeah.
and don't let him do that. And sometimes we acquiesce to that. We just do. And that's why to your point, we can have the best of intent, but I call it intention island. We just stay on it. We don't move off it. I have the best of intent to do that. I intend to do this. I want to do this. Tomorrow I'm going to do this. Next year, this year, da, 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 da. It's intention island.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a couple managers I used to have in companies way back, and there was one in particular, and very nice person, very nice person. And what I was, Paul, I love that idea. I'm going to follow up on that for you, Paul. I love what you're doing, Paul. I'm going to do this, Paul. Paul. And you know what? What happens after a while? I knew that nothing was going to happen.
Yeah.
They had the best of intent, I really do, but they weren't
Mm-hmm.
going to take any action to help me, much less themselves.
Yeah.
So it's all, you're absolutely right. It's all about taking that action, no matter how small it is. There's no
Mm-hmm.
such thing as a small action. It's just action.
So what does coaching with you look like as far as from the experience of your students? I mean, is it just like virtual one-on-one calls, or their classes or courses? What does it look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. It looks like this painting. It's like, whoa,
Every
whoa,
just
Paul,
throw it up there. Beautiful
it's like this.
disaster.
Yeah, it's like um, and I kid around that, right? But there is some painting that does take place. It's like
Mhm.
I like to challenge all different types of the parts of the brain, depending on that person's kind of normal reaction to things.
I see.
So sometimes there is that piece. Um, so traditionally, what I do is, I like to, I like to localize my relationship with each person, meaning I might have some kind of templates that I follow, but each person is unique in terms of what they may be looking for. So if it's an individual, I really listen to where they're at and really kind of develop sort of, listening to understand. It's so
Hmm.
easy to listen to reply, right? Oh, okay. Here's my coaching. Dun, 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 dun. Like, that's not what I said, Paul. That's not what I need. So I listen to understand and then craft something around that. Normally, it's one on one in that kind of scenario.
Hmm.
Normally, I meet virtually or in person, depending on our geo, right? And
Right, right.
nowadays, it really doesn't matter anymore, right? We
Hmm.
can meet virtually. I love to meet in person sometimes, though, if that's at all possible, because I think there is a physicalness and an
Right.
energy because we're vibrational beings. So I like to bring that in. And then it lasts for anywhere from 3, 6, 9, 12 months. And why I go from like 3, 6, 9, 12 months depends on the individual, depends on what they're looking for, depends on where they're at in their life, and depends on what their availability, approachability, and appetite is for. Another three A's: availability, approachability, appetite.
You're all about
Um,
the A's.
don't you? I love all about the
Even in
A's.
school, you're all A's.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so so and I look at that and I co-author that though with my client. It's not just like, oh, here's what I do, and da 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 da. It's like, what are you looking for? Where are you right now? Because if I just come out of the gate and say, well, here's what I do, it may or may not be aligned with what their needs are. So I really like to localize that, to have a diagnosis and sort of a portfolio of services I can offer. And then the flip side of that also is I do group coaching. So I coach people that are in smaller groups. They might be people that come together at an organization or association or something. And so we coach through like a series of different types of subjects or different types of pain points they might be having. Very classic case of this would be like managers in an organization, and the
Uh-huh.
managers might be newer managers or not, and they might be kind of stuck with certain things that they need some development on or growth on. Not doing anything wrong, but they just, they're gonna finesse and pivot a little bit to that
Gotcha.
next piece. So I work
Hmm.
with folks like that. And then personally, I'm very excited because I'm actually going to be coming out with a group coaching program early next year on imposter syndrome that
Oh, wow.
I'm gonna launch that and see if anyone's interested in it. And we'll spend I'm still working on the details of it, but I think there's a lot of need out there. I kind
Yeah,
of get
for
that. And
sure.
I think it would be great for people to come together, learn from each other, right? It's not about me. It's learning from each other as well and coach each other. And then I can bring in like content, and I can drip the content in, and we can have like activities, and we can practice some things, and then we can get to know each other in that group context. So I'm looking forward to that in the next year.
That sounds awesome. And I think it's a need that we've always had, but I think now more than ever, people are much more open to receiving that kind of coaching and training on that particular subject, because I think it's become more comfortable to bring up that people admit that they have it. Whereas before, even if you knew you had it, you'd hide it from the world because no one you don't want people to know that you feel that way. But now it's like becoming more acceptable. Like, hey, we're all kind of dealing with that.
Yeah, and you just bring up a really good point. Imposter syndrome was something that was classified as an actual phenomenon, is what they call it actually, back in 1978.
Oh,
And it was actually thought, oh, women have it. It's
huh.
women. It's women. It crosses all genders. It crosses all ages. It crosses all occupations. Students, parents, everybody has it. But the reason it got classified or it got more gender specific towards females was because men weren't admitting it. To what you said,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
women
yeah.
were admitting it. Oh, I'm feeling like this. I'm feeling like that. Da,
Hmm.
da, da. But men were like, no, not me, not me. Oh no, what do I do? What do I do? It's like they were, and it's exactly that. Now it's like 50-50.
Yeah.
and
When you
and
when you
and
gave that statistic, I was like shocked because I was like, I know way more men with imposter
exactly,
syndrome than women.
exactly. And so so now you're absolutely right. And now what the other thing you mentioned, you were talking about, and I'll call it out, which is vulnerability. People
Mm,
people are sometimes now, in the right situation, the right container, so to speak, they're very willing to be vulnerable, right? And just
yeah.
admit something, especially if it's safe.
Yep.
Some people aren't going to be just getting out there on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Insta, TikTok, or anything and say, "Oh, look at me." Some people do,
Yeah, yeah.
but people are willing to be a little bit more vulnerable in the right kind of space, and that's what I want to create for people, whether it be really one on one and
Hmm.
or small group.
I love it. I'm so glad that you exist in this world and are doing this work because I think it's so necessary. And in just getting to know you in this past hour and change, I feel very confident that you are the right person to be doing and heading this kind of work. It's been a real pleasure and a joy to get to know you and meet you. You were referred to me with such high praise, and I was skeptical. I was like, I don't know. It'll be hard to hit this bar that you've set for Paul, but you've exceeded that bar. So, Paul,
Thank
it's
you,
been
my friend.
awesome.
Well, Nolan, it's been an honor. I talking with you is like talking to an old friend, and just it's very natural, and I just really appreciate that because you've made it very easy to kind of reveal who I am. So that's a testimonial to you
Oh,
and who
thank
you
you.
are as your heart has shown through.
Well, I appreciate that. I don't know if I appreciate that more or just as much as you've instilled this fire in me to now go and search up Partridge Family hits because I promise you I am going to go and start up a little playlist and I have a feeling that because I've
Oh
never wanted
no,
to, but I have a feeling I'm going to be like so full of joy now because of
I
it.
don't. That
I'll
or
think
you'll
of
never
you.
talk, or you'll never talk to me again.
No, because I've always known that the Partridge Family was kind of similar in that same genre as the Brady Bunch, which
Yeah.
I loved the Brady Bunch. I grew up on that, and one of my favorite songs of all time is when they sang "Sunshine Day." I think I'll go for a walk. It's so cheesy, but
I
I'm
have that
like,
one too. I
I
have that
listen
one
to that
too.
and my day
Yeah.
is made. So if Partridge Family is anything like that to cause me to want to snap my fingers on while I wait to board a plane, they got to be good. So
There's a
so I thank
whole
you for
yeah.
that.
You're very welcome, my friend. You're very welcome, and you can think of me when you're on that playlist.
Oh, I will. I might like take a screenshot of you and put that as the album cover.
I love it. I love it. Love it.
Well, thanks so much, Paul. I really appreciate it. For people who want to get in touch with you, learn more about your products, your services, what's the best way they can reach you at?
They can probably the three easiest is my website, Paul
Hmm.
N. Larsen, LARSEN.com. They can also just shoot me an email. I'm very open to receiving emails and just understanding what's all about with people, right? What's it,
Oh, that's really good. That's
Oh,
really
I
nice of
love
you.
that. I'd love to connect that way. So that's Paul at paulandlarson.com. Or if people are on whatever their platform of choice, I'm on LinkedIn, Insta, Facebook, Twitter. So any of those is Paul and Larsen or Voice as a Leader. So any of that. But you can
Awesome.
Google me in any way, and just if they want to just reach out, I'm there. I'm there
Okay.
for you.
And I'll put all of the links in our show notes and descriptions as well. So for our listeners or viewers, if they don't want to try to remember all of that,
Yeah.
it'll be very easy to access there.
Somehow I gotta, now you got me thinking. I've gotta get my SEO hooked up between Partridge Family and like Paul. I don't want to.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not. I don't know if I can do that, but it's worth a shot.
hey, this could be a game changer for you, and
Yeah.
you're welcome for that.
Thank you, my friend. Gratitude, gratitude.
uh, Paul, really appreciate it. I look forward to continuing to keep in touch with you, and I'm looking forward to your program that's coming out next year with the imposter syndrome. So keep us posted on that.
I sure will. Thank you so much, Nolan. Appreciate it.